Good afternoon, everyone. Let us continue today with Numbers chapter 14. We left off at verse 24 last week, but I need to move back a little bit just to level set where we are going from here because this is a pivotal chapter and we need to spend some time to understand why this is a major turning point in the history of the Israelites and how God's plan has come to an adjustment. Now, as you can see, when we began chapter 14, we learned that the Israelites had decided to not proceed with entering into the promised land, and they had a plan to select another leader to lead them back to Egypt. Now, not only that they had tried to defy God, they had tried to reverse the entire plan after seeing what God had done in Egypt, crossing the Red Sea, and in the wilderness, having their manna, water from the rock, and everything else that God has provided for them. And here they are looking to reverse everything as if nothing had happened. They had seen God in Mount Sinai, received the law, saw how the people had worshipped the golden calf and what God did as a punishment. There was the construction of the tabernacle, and everybody had chipped in, and everything was fine until now. And so God said, I want to destroy all of them and start again with Moses. And if you can recall in Exodus chapter 32, that happened at the golden calf. Right up there at Mount Sinai, God was incensed with the people down there, but Moses pleaded with God, and God relented and did not destroy the Israelites, did not begin again, but had dealt with the situation as what Moses had done. In Numbers chapter 14, again, in the same way, Moses appealed to God. And he had a long discussion with God, fighting and arguing the case for the Israelites. And finally, in verse 19, as you had read, it says, pardon the iniquity of this people, I pray, according to the greatness of your mercy, as you have forgiven this people from Egypt even until now. Now, understand, pardon is to forgive. We have seen this before. And this people would be the Israelites. And here, Moses is really pleading on behalf, is entreating or pleading to God. Don't do that because you have great mercy. And you read this in the book of Psalms, right? God's chesed. And that would be loving kindness, actually. Just as you have forgiven this people before, from Egypt until now, there have been a number of instances, especially in Exodus chapter 20. And so, again, we find that Moses appealed. And then look at what verse 20 says. I have pardoned according to your word. Now, according to your word means what Moses had argued. So God listens to Moses. Now, interestingly, you find that there is no going to the tabernacle and no offering of animals, no ritual, because this has nothing to do with the tabernacle. So there is no sacrifice in that context. But there is an appeal directly to God, and God says, I have forgiven. This is important. I have forgiven. Which means that God has always the ability when anyone offends God, and that would be the concept is you owe God something. And when God says he forgives, it's like he is allowing the debt to be forgotten. He's allowing that owing debt to be nullified. And that's what forgiven is all about, that there's nothing owing by the Israelites. However, there is another thing that we will read as we go forward, that there is retribution. Forgiveness does not mean no punishment. Forgiveness means God has settled that account of a complaint, of God's anger, and God has resolved that and nullified that debt. However, there is always a retribution. Somebody has to pay for it. And we need to understand forgiveness and punishment are two separate things altogether. Look at what God has to say. But truly as I live, and God is forever, right? The Hebrew would say he is Haya Hove Yithye, who was, it is, and is to come. That his name tells us that he is the ever-living one, eternal God. That as I live, all the land, okay, earth is the land, shall be filled with the glory of the Lord. Because all these men have seen my glory, and the signs which I did in Egypt and in the wilderness have put me to the test now these 10 times. And we'll talk about this, and then we'll carry on. Just for interest's sake, the word glory is pronounced as kavod. Glory would be very similar to the Chinese word 重 or 看重, or basically the concept is that there is a significant importance. There is the concept of heaviness. It is really important. Now, interestingly, we have talked about body parts in Hebrew, and for glory, kavod, as it is in the Hebrew, the body part is kaved. Kaved. Kaved is liver. And that body part is the heaviest organ in the body. And the Hebrew people use that to represent glory, represent what is significantly important. In fact, the most important. So just understand that in Hebrew, the word glory is to pay heaviness, importance, significance. And that comes from the word liver. Now, this about the test is important. In verse 22, God says that you have tried me. The idea here is to test, to prove, right? Some would translate as to tempt me, right? But there are 10 times. There are 10 times. And they have not heeded my voice 10 times. And so understand that because of these 10 times, including this one, the promise of God is they shall certainly not see the land which I swore to their fathers, nor shall any of those who rejected me see it. So you understand that there are two parts here. What are these 10 times? Who are they that will not see the land? And who are these who have rejected me? And that's where we need to come to grips with today when we move on in this session. What are the 10 times? The 10 times that God had mentioned start with Exodus chapter 14, verse 11. When they were about to cross the Red Sea, The second one, we know it from Psalms chapter 106, verses 6 and 7. This depicts the time after they had crossed the Red Sea and they tempted God again. The third time is in Exodus chapter 15. After they crossed the Red Sea, in verse 23 and 24, they came to bitter water at Marah, and they complained about the water, and God healed the water. The next one is in Exodus 17. Another situation of water. In verse 1, that Moses had to strike the rock at Rephidim. Now, another one would be something to about instructions that God had given that they did not listen to him. Exodus chapter 16, verses 19 to 20. They were told that when they picked up their manna, do not leave it until morning. But they didn't hear that and it went bad. The sixth one is in Exodus chapter 16 as well, in verses 25 to 27. It concerns the Sabbath that they were to pick every day, but when it comes to the sixth day, they pick twice the amount. And then the seventh day, they rested and they would have manna to eat. The seventh time is in Exodus chapter 16, verse 3. This has to do with wanting meat, and God gave them quail. Next one is in Numbers 11, verse 4, with a mixed multitude complaining that food wasn't good, and God gave them quail up to their ears. The ninth one is in Exodus chapter 32, and that was the episode of the golden calf, and God was extremely, extremely angry. The final time is here in Numbers chapter 14. And God was equally angry and wants to wipe them all out, and thereby giving us 10 times that God is accounting to what they have done. We're told that Caleb is different. He's got a different character, and he has followed me fully. And I will bring into the land where he went, his descendants shall inherit it. Now the Amalekites and the Canaanites dwell in the valley. Tomorrow turn, move out into the wilderness by the way of the Red Sea. What does this mean? Number one, Caleb is spared. Now by Caleb being spared, we also understand this, that God had also spared Joshua. But the name Joshua doesn't appear as much until we get to the end part of the book of Deuteronomy, because he would be the prophet that God will raise up after Moses, having the same authority as Moses, and he led the children of Israel into Canaan. The second thing that's going to happen is this. The Amalekites and the Canaanites were there, and God says, let's leave. This means, let's leave. And they left. Verse 26, and the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, how long shall I bear with this evil congregation who complain against me? The idea here is talking about evil, right? This evil congregation, when they complain, they murmur against God. Now, evil means things that is not right in the eyes of God. And evil and good is also from the eyes of the beholder. When God looks at this congregation and says they are evil, it means that they have been complaining, and that is not right to God. I have heard the complaints that the children of Israel make against me. They might be complaining to Moses, but God knows everything about it. Say to them, as I live, this is the second time as I live is an oath. It is a serious thing. It's an oath that it must come true. That the Lord says, just as you have spoken in my hearing, this would be the case argued by Moses. Now, just as you have pleaded for them and I have forgiven them, so I will do to you. You means you all here, right? Verse 28, it'll be to you all. All the ones in the congregation. It says, the carcasses of you who have complained against me shall fall in the wilderness. Fall in the wilderness is a euphemism for die. You will all fall down and die. All of you who were numbered according to your entire number from 20 years old and above. Now, this is recorded in Numbers chapter 1, also in Exodus chapter 12. What was this? When they numbered, in verse 29, 20 years old and above, these would be who? The entire number from their sons. Now, this word is missing in the translation, which tells us that God faulted the ones that were numbered 20-year-old and above because they came against God, murmured, complained, and decided not to go in. Which also gives us another view that not everyone had died. Only the men, 20-year-old and above, who were called the armies of God, had died. And the entire generation, 20 years and above, their generation would be between 20 to 40 years. The reason I'm saying this is because the length of life of people then are not all that long. Moses is an exceptionally long-aged person, like Abraham as well. But the idea here is God will not allow those who don't want to go in, and these were the ones who represented everyone in Israel, except for Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, Joshua, the son of Nun, this is Yehoshua, Caleb. You shall by no means enter into the land which I swore that I would make you dwell in. And so we would understand this, that all these 20-year-old and above men are not going in. But your little ones whom you said would be victims, I will bring in, and they shall know the land which you have despised. This would be the people in Deuteronomy. In the book of Deuteronomy, they will be talking about that. Now in verse 31, your little ones comes from the word tough. It means those unable to march. So obviously these are truly the children, right? The children, and they are not like the adults to walk in the wilderness. And so the children had a special place to be taken care of by their family. And they said, well, they have no part of this decision. No part of this decision. And so they said, if that is the case, God says, I will give that to them, right? Give that to them, that they may be victims, right? They may be victims that is part of this whole escapade or the whole narrative of them rejecting to go in, and yet they had the heart to defend the little ones. And so God says, yes, the little ones will go in. The ones that cannot march, we don't know to what age it would be, but it would be at least up to the age of 19. Because 20-year-old and above will not be able to, because they are part and parcel of those numbered in Exodus chapter 12 and Numbers chapter 1. And so this is what God had said. But for you, your carcasses shall fall in this wilderness. Your sons shall be shepherds in the wilderness 40 years. Means the young ones will still be there, but they can't go in until everyone has borne the brunt of your infidelity. Verse 33, the idea here is called infidelity. This is actually harlotry. And this is something which we would need to explain. How is it that the Israelites are called practicing harlotry? The reason being is that they had decided to listen to another God than Jehovah himself. That they did not go in according to what God had said. They wanted to elect another one to go back to Egypt. And that is called harlotry in the Bible. So harlotry does not necessarily mean that there is a pagan idol and you're bowing down to it. Harlotry will also mean that when their will is not given to God and they rather listen to men and other people in defiance of God. And God looks very seriously against harlotry. And it's said here very clearly, God is so angry that your carcasses are consumed in the wilderness. That you or you all will be these 20-year-old and above. In verse 34, it says, according to the number of days in which you spied out in the land, 40 days. For each day shall bear the guilt 1 year. So 40 years that you shall know my rejection. Verse 34, the idea is actually opposition. That God had opposed. And this really means a breach of promise. They were supposed to go in, but they didn't. They opposed God. And so in this whole picture, in the English called rejection, they had breached the promise given to God that everything you say we will do. That's Exodus chapter 24, in the covenant of Moses. They decided that they are going home to Egypt instead of going home to Canaan. So this is the way that they had rejected God, and God says, I will also reject you. That although I told you I will bring you in, since you don't want to go in, you are not going in. I, the Lord, have spoken this. Can God do this? And the answer is yes. This generation is what God is going to deal with, but God is still going to honor his word that the children of Israel, the younger ones, are going to inherit the land. The Lord have spoken this. I will surely do to all this evil congregation who are gathered together against me. In the wilderness they shall be eaten up, and there they shall die. Now the men whom Moses sent to spy out in the land to explore, and they returned and made the congregation complain against him by bringing a bad report, saying bad things about the land. Those very men who brought the evil report about the land died by, now this is important, by the plague, right? Before the Lord. But Yehoshua, the son of Nun, and Caleb, the son of Yephuneh, remained alive of the men who went to spy out in the land. And so now we need to unpack by the plague. In verse 37, when it says the plague, understand that plague is not an illness. The word plague here is a blow, right? A blow. A stroke. That God smashed or boxed the face of these people. And the idea here is to show them who God is, that they too, these 10 of them, will die by the plague. And the reason why I'm saying that this is very important is because of this word, the. It is a very definite plague. And this plague is known by the author and by the people. Now understand, the word the plague in the Hebrew doesn't say a whole lot. It merely tells us that God is going to strike them, God is going to slap them, God is going to box them, God is going to put a stroke on them, but it is going to be very severe. And exactly what this particular strike or slap is, we actually don't know. But we do know that the author and the people at that point in time knew exactly what was happening. Now, there are a lot of what we call traditions, but we'll put traditions aside for this morning. It appears that they who have died a very violent death, a death that was befitting their antagonizing God. That is a retribution. Our last part is reading from verse 39. Now, in verse 39, it says, after, this would be, and then Moses had told these words to all the children of Israel, and the people mourned greatly. The word mourn, really, it's to cause them to wail. Cause them to wail. And they were crying out loudly. And then they rose early in the morning and went up to the top of the mountain, saying to Moses, here we are, and we will go up to the place which the Lord had promised, for we have sinned. This is basically saying, I am so sorry. And the effect is, no can do. God had enough with them, and there was no other way out. Moses now says, and Moses said, why do you transgress the command of the Lord? Now, in verse 41, transgress literally means to pass over. Pass over. Meaning not unknowingly or, and they kind of ignored the command of the Lord. Why? Because the command of the Lord says to turn around and go by the sea of the Red Sea. They are to turn away. And Moses says, for this will not succeed. If you ignore or pass over the commands of God, you will never succeed. It says, do not go up, lest you will be defeated by your enemies. Now, this is the crucial point. For the Lord is not among you. What does that mean? It means that if they were to go out and fight with the people, who are the people? The Amalekites and the Canaanites. There before you, God promised them, you shall fall by the sword. Does this mean that God is holding the Israelites responsible for rejecting to go in? And the answer is yes. And God doesn't want this unfaithful bunch to go in, because you have turned away from the Lord. The Lord will not be with you. It means that if they were to go into the promised land and God is not going with them, they will stand no chance with the great enemies in the land. Now look at verse 44. They couldn't be bothered. Verse 44 says that they presumed to go up. The word presume to go up is cause themselves what should we do? Cause themselves to swell up, right? And they ignored God. And so they are now going in or trying to go in by their own strength. Already, Moses has said, the Lord is not among you. Don't go in. It's a waste of time. Neither the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord nor Moses departed from the camp. God didn't move. They moved. And obviously, they are against God's words. And so God only wanted them to listen, go into the land, and yet they don't want to. Then the Amalekites and the Canaanites who dwelt in that mountain came down and attacked them and drove them back as far as Hormah. Hormah. The idea here is to help them understand that Hormah is, how should you say? Hormah means to be utterly destroyed. And so God gave them a foretaste of how it is like when God is to ignore them. But God didn't, right? God is teaching them a lesson. And this basically means, as only a name plays, it was also a total defeat. Because God didn't give them the Amalekites and the Canaanites. So the Lord will not be with you. They intentionally wanted to go ahead because they were wrong. They knew they were wrong. But that's not how life works. God had forgiven them. There was no need for a sacrifice because this has nothing to do with the temple. They have gone against God's words of, one, not going in to possess a land, and number two, never listen to God about how the land is and to trust God that everything will be fine. That is their problem. And because of that, nobody was able to go into the promised land. And much later, we read about how Joshua would lead them in the book of Joshua. But for now, in Numbers chapter 14, we now learn that there is no way for the Israelites to conquer a land unless God has given it to them. That's number one. Number two, they should also realize that Moses is God's appointed leader. Who they appoint is irrelevant. God has appointed a leader and he was supposed to bring them in, but now they are not going in. Only the little ones who don't know left from right or good and evil are the ones who will enter into the promised land. And this, we conclude Numbers chapter 14 to give us a good feel of how God is when it comes to a consistent rejection of God. God also comes full circle to reject the people. And from what we read from missing words in the book of Numbers, we probably think that God has more interest that the men will die. And if the rest don't die, that's okay. And so the men who are counted in Exodus chapter 12 should be the one to pay the price and to make sure that the Israelites will always remember this lesson, that they could have gone in, but they didn't. And now they have to pay the price for a total of 40 years. Now with this, we come to the end of our session today.